We saw our first coach get fired in the SEC, and it's not Billy Napier, which is a little bit of a shock. It's Sam Pittman who's out at Arkansas. And honestly, it makes a ton of sense. I did kind of expect them to wait a little bit to make this decision simply because, his buyout structure was structured differently than most, to where if he dropped below 500, they could get rid of him for less. They just would have had to been patient and hopefully lose the next 4 games. And honestly, I think it's a good sign that they didn't bother to do that and they just paid the buyout to move on. I think they have the perfect candidate to be an interim coach. I'll talk about him more later, but I don't think he's the guy you want to lead this program into the future with. I think that would be setting the program back in modern times, I guess is the best way to put it. But I think this is going to be a pretty desirable job, but I don't think it's going to be a top tier job. I think there are going to be guys that personally will want more than what they can get at Arkansas. I think they're going to have to go ahead and invest in this program, which honestly I do kind of expect them to do, if I'm being honest with you. I think that listening to their AD talk, I could see them, investing more because he had mentioned that he wasn't really happy with how it was funded and he felt like they needed more for the football program. They just invested into the basketball program, which is a great sign that maybe they are willing now to spend and to get into this new era and really try to improve the team. I'm sure they're not just trying to be a basketball school, but the question is like, what are the real expectations at Arkansas? And I'll tell you what I view it as. I'm not an Arkansas fan, and that the SEC is wild, man. Like I'm a fan of the Gators. The SEC as a whole is wild. But I think reasonable expectations at Arkansas is to be an 8-4 team at minimum. And I mean minimum is what they want. And I think they want seasons where they're elevated into the real national title discussion and the SEC championship discussion. And I think that that's honestly going to be enough to keep that fan base happy. And you could have a long career there and be successful. I always kind of look at like what Dan Mullen did at Mississippi State. And I go, that's kind of what they're looking for. They're looking for that consistently good team who can get up there and have elevated seasons. Obviously Dan Mullen didn't win a title or anything at Mississippi State, but I know they would ideally like to do that. So I say, they are going to aim a little bit higher than that. But I think that's a pretty good base to consider. And if you hear dogs barking in the background, I apologize. But I think that's a pretty good base to consider. And I think that that's really what they're looking for in their next head coach and what they want from this program going into the future. I think that Bobby Petrino, who's going to be the interim coach, is a fantastic guy to have to lead the program for the rest of the season. I know that he has a history at Arkansas being fantastic with Ryan Mallett at quarterback. And he had, I think, the only 11-win season in Arkansas history or like recent history. And I think that those days are past. I'm just going to say it. I don't think he should be the guy you guys hire. And I think that you absolutely need to aim higher. Just aim higher than that. You're a better program than that. You don't need to settle for him being your long-term head coach. I think that in a lot of ways, he's not as good as he used to be. He's getting older, man, and times change. I think they need to consider going younger with their next head coach. I think Sam Pittman, he did a lot of good and positive things there. He ran a good program at Arkansas, but he never could get him over the hump. And I think the recruiting was part of it. And I do think that the level of commitment from the administration was also kind of an issue there. I'm just going to be honest. I do think that that did affect Arkansas a little bit. I'd like to see what they're going to commit into the future because that makes predicting who they might have as their head coach a little bit easier. I just don't know the level of commitment sitting here right now on September 29th as I record this. And, I'm very, very interested to see what they choose and like where they want to commit and like what level are they going to jump in? Are they going to go after huge coaches, promise them that they're going to go all in on football? Because if so, Arkansas is backed by enough money where they could do what Texas Tech did and dominate the portal. And then if they get the right coach, they can get their high school recruiting foothold back in Texas, start to build that base. And I think that they could be a fantastic program. It's just what level of commitment are they going to get from the administration? And ultimately in college football, it comes down to the donors. Like, what are the donors going to give them for commitment? So I really can't answer this question without knowing that. But I'm going to give my honest opinion on guys who could be candidates for this job. I think, of course, you want to talk to Rhett Lashley, the head coach at SMU. He has Arkansas connections. I think he was a quarterback there, or I'm certain he was. Played underneath Gus Malzahn. And I think that he is absolutely somebody you should contact and see if he wants the job. I'm going to be honest with you. He's one of the guys that I don't really think, unless Arkansas is going to go all in, is going to consider leaving SMU because they are backed by so much money there. And it's a program with a ton of potential. They're already in Texas, they have a ton of money. So it'll be hard to lure him away. And to be honest with you, they would really have to go all in to get him there. I'm not sure that they're going to go to the level that it would take to get him, and we'll have to see. That's one of the ones that's just I'm not sure. The next guy I would say is John Summerall. Kind of the same questions there. I'm not 100% sure that they're going to go in enough for him because he's shown a lot of patience in his coaching career so far and choosing what he wants. And I do think that he's looking for one of the top tier jobs. He's looking for the job with the high pressure, high stakes. And if Arkansas doesn't jump in, go all in, like what they did with hiring John Calipari, and they put that level of commitment into the football program, I really don't think he's going to consider him. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think he will. Another guy, though, that I got to mention that I think makes some sense for the program's the head coach at Memphis who just beat him, Ryan Silverfield. I think he's a good coach. I personally think Arkansas is probably going to try to lean into a coach with probably some Texas connections or at least a name value that's going to help them in recruiting. And I'm not sure. I think he would be a good hire for them. He's a good coach. Memphis has been really consistent underneath him, and he's been there a while, which is a good sign. I also think that that's kind of how you get into these problematic situations like UF. Billy Napier was at Louisiana, Lafayette for what? I think 2 years, 3 years, or 2 years, I think it was, and he was successful, but I think a guy like Silverfield who actually has some history as a head coach, has been at Memphis for a while leading the program, I think's a good sign. So, I mean, he'd probably be a pretty good hire. I'm not sure that that's the direction they're going to go. I think the next guy is probably a little bit more of who I would like to see them target. And I say that not just because I'm a Gator fan and I know a lot about him, but it's because I think he's a really good fit at a program like this. And maybe it's not going to be popular, and I'm sure it's not, and I'm sure fans are gonna hate it because of how things ended at UF, but I think Dan Mullen's a really good option for Arkansas. If they don't go all in and they're not willing to commit the level of resources that they need to be at the top of the SEC and get one of the top coaches, I absolutely think Dan Mullen's a good coach to get. I think that if he wants to take another stab at a big job, get back to the SEC, which I don't know. I don't really know what his ambitions are now that he's back into coaching. And, I don't know how much being in Vegas is a big draw for him. I know his son's kind of getting older, and that has probably a bit of an impact on where he wants to be. I think he'd be a good hire for him. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, I look at what he did at Mississippi State, and I think that blueprint and the style and his style, I think, as long as he surrounded himself with good coaches, would really work there. And I think he could elevate that program to the 8-win consistency that they would like. And he would be able to get him over the hump for some better seasons, like what he did at Mississippi State. Maybe I'm living in the past a little bit, but I look even at what he did at UF. He was a real good coach here. It ended poorly because this is a top tier job, and the expectations here are absolutely insane. And we did have a bad year, and his recruiting suffered. And I personally would have preferred to not see him get fired, but that's a little bit of revisionist history as well. I'll admit, I'm a fan. I was pretty frustrated with his comments on recruiting and just how things were going, but I think he could go in there and be a good coach for him. And I know he's not going to be the popular choice, and I honestly don't think they'll probably end up hiring him, but I just think he makes a ton of sense for them. And like I said, I'm a Gator fan, so maybe it's skewed somehow, although you would think it'd be negatively, but I think he's a good coach. I think he'd make a ton of sense for him. And I think he would be willing to stay there the long term, which is something else that I think Arkansas has to think about because you know I don't think anybody would poach their coach away, but it is something to think about. Maybe one of the bigger schools in the SEC or Big Ten targeting their guy to move up. But I really like Mullen. I think another option, though, that I would absolutely say makes a ton of sense, even though things haven't really gone well the last few seasons at UTSA, is Jeff Traylor. I really think he has connections to Arkansas. He was a running backs coach there. It did not go well. It was underneath Chad Morris. Everybody knows how that went. That time was awful for Arkansas. So maybe you don't want to revisit that history, but he is a really good head coach. He's shown that he can lead a program. Now, there are some questions. They moved up to the American, and he certainly hasn't had the level of success that he had, when he was in the CUSA. But I do think he's a good coach, and I think you could consider him. He isn't a top tier guy to me. I personally think that his recruiting connections to Texas would be good, and he does have a connection to the program, which is also good. But maybe I would consider a first-time head coach over him, and a guy like Colin Klein, the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. I think he'd be somebody to consider. I personally think that GJ Kinney, the head coach at Texas State, is somebody to consider. I don't know, necessarily. I honestly, I haven't made a video on Oklahoma State, but I think he's probably my top choice for the Oklahoma State job. He makes a ton of sense. And to say like, Ryan Silverfield, somebody else, I'll mention, we already talked about him in this, and I should have said it there. I kind of lean towards putting him at Virginia Tech. It's just a personal opinion. I also maybe like a Will Stein. He's a Kentucky native, might have some interest in going there, gets him closer to home. I don't know. I haven't done a lot on those, and I haven't dug deep. And this here is a little bit more of an instant reaction and just my first thoughts anyway. So it's not going to be as put together. And we'll come out with videos as we get towards the end of the year and we get close to the hiring cycle. And I'm going to give you my predictions, who I would like to see, and all that. And then once they are hired, we'll discuss them. But I really think that Arkansas could be a top tier job if they want to go all in. I just don't know the level of commitment. So I have a hard time with it. And that's why, even though it's not probably the sexy hire, I say you go and you look at a guy like Dan Mullen and you bring in somebody who just has a level of consistency that is good. He has been a good head coach. Even at UF, he had a bad year, but he was a good head coach for us. His record was good. Our program was usually pretty good. We made mistakes and we certainly sucked his last year there, but I think the world's learned that the coordinators and the people he had around him were pretty bad and at Florida, and I think that he learned apparently because they're not with him out west. So as long as he doesn't try to bring Todd Grantham and them guys in with him to Arkansas, I think he'd be a good hire. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. Who's your top choice? Who do you think that they're going to target? I know you guys are probably going to disagree. Tell me why you disagree about Dan Mullen being a good choice for this job, but I really think what he did at Mississippi State's a good blueprint for this program. I really do. And right now in September, I'm gonna say I would probably lean Dan Mullen. We got to see how things finish up this year at UNLV for him. We got to see how the rest of the season goes, what jobs officially become open, and we'll also start to kind of get a little bit of a gauge on where people might want to go. Because obviously I'm not that well connected, so I rely upon reading and hearing about different sources within programs. So we'll naturally get some more info, and we'll talk about this job in the future a little bit more. But that's just my instant reaction. I think it was time. I think Petrino's a good interim coach. Don't hire him on full time. And I think I'd target a proven winner like Dan Mullen, who can consistently make your program good and then elevate it a little bit. So that's my thoughts for now. I want to hear what you guys think down below. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. I'll catch you in the next one. I'm out.